Yesterday, I broke down the league-winning wide receivers, the best cases for all of these guys. Today, we're actually going to rank them, and Danny's joining me, and we're going to break down our top 15 to 20 or so wide receiver rankings, talk about where we would take them in a redraft league, talk about, their positional value versus each other, and all of the arguments that we could possibly get into. The wide receiver position is very near and dear to our heart, so this one's definitely going to be probably the most fun of the rankings videos. And especially if you guys are playing on Underdog, you guys know that these players are going high in drafts right now. The value has never been higher for wide receivers and mostly a PPR landscape. So this one will be a lot of fun. If you enjoy, leave a like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Danny, what's up? How you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, you guys would have already saw our quarterbacks and our running backs video. It's so funny because we're thinking about, oh, well, the top 15 running backs. We were talking about guys going in, the fourth, fifth round of ADP. All of these guys on today's video are, for what it's worth, top 31, 32 overall players in both of our rankings. So it's going to be a lot of fun talking about guys that will legitimately make a difference in terms of their ceiling versus floor outcome, whether you smash your draft or whether you fail your draft.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. All right, so let's get it started. We're going to start with the two guys. This is the way that I have my tiers structured. Me and Danny are going to have some differences here and there. We'll kind of work through them. The way I have my tiers structured is, to me, Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase are in their own tier. They're the 101 and 102. I will say I don't blame people for wanting to take Ja'Marr Chase over Justin Jefferson if you guys play in a league that maybe favors big plays, or maybe it's a standard league or a half PPR league where touchdowns are more important, because I do think Ja'Marr Chase has a higher touchdown upside than what Justin Jefferson represents. But both of these guys have the case to absolutely smash 180 plus targets, 1,500 to 1,700 receiving yards, 10 plus touchdowns. They are the clear 101 and 102 in all formats, standard, half PPR, PPR, whatever. I'm taking Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase over any other running back, any other wide receiver.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree there. They are my number 1 and 2 respectively as well. Jefferson 1, Chase 2. But like you said, if you're in a half PPR league with, big play bonuses, like let's just say hypothetically a 40-yard touchdown catch is worth an extra 2 points in your league, you're going to prefer obviously the explosive nature of that Bengals offense of Ja'Marr Chase. Whereas if you're in your bog standard, full PPR league, Justin Jefferson's going to project for over 180 targets. Justin Jefferson's going to project for over 1,900 receiving yards. So while I do think that they are in the same tier, I would have Jefferson at 1, unless your league format really, really rewards big plays.
Yeah, absolutely. When we look through like the situational factors of these two players, there's really only one thing that you could say against them, which is their target competition. Of course, with Chase competing for targets with T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, Justin Jefferson competing for targets with TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison now added to the fold. But everybody knows that these guys are the number ones of this team. Their quarterbacks know it. Their offensive coordinators know it. They're going to get the ball, like we said, 170, 190 potentially times at their ceiling range of outcomes. We do not need to talk about these guys very long. Everybody knows that they're studs, but definitely what you should know and what you should take away from this section is that they should be the first and second pick off the board.
And once TJ Hawkinson came over, yeah, his raw target share went down a little bit. Justin Jefferson, 29.3% to 28.38. But he still averaged 12 targets per game. He still averaged over 110 receiving yards per game. And we did see him become a better touchdown scorer in that stretch, averaging about 0.7 touchdowns per game in that stretch. Obviously, he scored, 8 on the season. I wouldn't be shocked if he's closest to that 11, 12 type of area working in this offense this year. There's a legitimate case that, Justin Jefferson can have a Cooper Kupp level dominant season from 2021.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can move to the next tier of guys. I have a massive tier here. Let me know if you have anything different. My next rated player is Tyreek Hill. That's who I have next because, he gives you the high weekly ceiling output that you're looking for. He can single-handedly win you a league, win you a week. And it's basically because he has the explosive play ability to go along with the target earning ability. And it didn't matter that he changed teams. It didn't matter that he went from Patrick Mahomes to Tua Tagovailoa last year. Maybe if we're talking about like how each of these guys smash versus how each of these guys miss, the way that Tyreek misses, quote unquote, is if Tua deals with injury again. But even then, I still think we're talking about a guy that is probably a top 10 receiver in points per game. He probably just isn't the wide receiver 1, 2, or 3 in points per game that he could be if Tua Tagovailoa stays healthy. And when he played with Tua, I'm sure you're going to break it down, he was dominant.
Yeah, for what it's worth, when he did play with Tua, when Tua was fully healthy, obviously, there are going to be some sort of people that discredit Tua, oh, product of the system. Oh, he's not that talented. He just, Mike McDaniel carries him. I get that. Whether you want to claim he's an amazing real life quarterback or just a solid good one, in fantasy football, we really don't care if he's, Tom Brady or if he's just a good quarterback. You know what I mean? He could be a good quarterback and still be well enough for Tyreek Hill. I mean, just look at Justin Jefferson. Kirk Cousins is not a guy that people would put in the tier one, and yet Justin Jefferson's the number one on our list. When it comes to Tyreek Hill, when he played with Tua Tagovailoa last year, averaged almost 22.4 PPR points per game on a near 32% target share. Despite, another guy on this list we'll get into in a second being in that presence of that Miami Dolphins, Tyreek Hill was the number one, the number two, the number three read. 32% target share for a guy that has been known as, the big play, efficient wide receiver in the past. He's fully evolved into this elite target earning player, guy who was averaging over 10 targets per game when Tua Tagovailoa was healthy last year.
Yeah, absolutely. No qualms with Tyreek Hill. I think if you guys have the third pick in your draft, if you have the fourth pick in your draft, fifth pick in your draft, I personally have Tyreek Hill ranked over every running back right now. Agreed. I go back and forth between Bijan Robinson and Tyreek Hill. And if you guys are really high on McCaffrey, I suppose he would fit into that mix as well. But if you're in any kind of PPR league, if you're in a league that has any kind of big play bonuses like my home league does, it's so hard to pass up Tyreek Hill's name because he's just a walking big play. The next couple guys that we're going to break down here, I believe these are all the guys that you have probably in this tier: CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, and Cooper Kupp. For me, I think when we break down the individual case for each of these guys, how does each guy smash? How does each guy miss? There is very, very few ways that CeeDee Lamb does not hit at least a top 10 season this year. I think he is the safest player in the first round, not named like Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, because he has a good quarterback. Yeah, he might, people argue about how good Dak is all the time, but he's at least as good as Kirk Cousins. The offense is going to throw the ball like at a top 10 rate. They're a high-paced offense, like top 5 in pace of play the last like 5 years. He's a very talented player. He finishes wide receiver 7 in points per game last year as a 23-year-old, first year breaking the top 10 receivers for him. He's a high reception perception guy. He was top 6 in yards per route run last year. Of course, because he's young, he's not like an injury risk or anything like that. CeeDee Lamb is such a clean projection to the point that I have him ranked at 6th overall. I'm sure a lot of people are able to get him closer to the end of the first round at like 10, 11, 12, sometimes even in the second round of their drafts. For me, CeeDee Lamb is just so easy to project, and that's why I have him as my wide receiver 4.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I would actually agree that I would slightly have Jefferson and Chase, as the clear top 2. However, because I have the next 3 guys for myself ranked from 3 to 5, I did have them kind of in that tier. CeeDee Lamb was just following behind at 8. So same names. I do have Stephon Diggs at 4, Cooper Kupp at 5, and then CeeDee Lamb as my 8th overall player. So I'll just quickly make the case for why I'm so high on Stephon Diggs, a guy that I legitimately considered putting over Tyreek Hill because of how dominant he was last year before Josh Allen completely ripped his elbow apart with that UCL injury against the New York Jets. Before week 9, I believe, is when he suffered the injury. Stephon Diggs, that Buffalo Bills offense, Josh Allen, looked like the most unstoppable unit in the entire NFL. Contextualize this. Let's just talk about Josh Allen quickly. We were talking a little bit about it off stream, but before he suffered that injury, like Josh Allen was going to win MVP. He was averaging over 300 passing yards per game, averaging nearly 3 passing touchdowns per game, on top of over 40 rushing yards and 0.3 rushing touchdowns per game. He was averaging in fantasy nearly 28 points per game from the quarterback position. And I know, how does that tie into Stephon Diggs? If he's, this level of player, obviously, like he's going to contribute on the ground. Like, how does that affect Stephon Diggs? Stephon Diggs was averaging the same amount of points per game last year before Cooper Kupp got hurt as Cooper Kupp. 24.8 PPR points per game in those first 8 games. He was on pace for like 135 catches, 1,800 yards, and like 17 touchdowns. I think Josh Allen can legitimately throw for 45, 50 touchdowns next year. And if that's the case, the clear-cut number 1 target on what should, in my opinion, has a floor of a top 5 offense with the ceiling of being by far the best in the NFL with the Buffalo Bills. I think he's a clear-cut top 4 overall player for me. And again, like I said, if you want to argue him over Tyreek Hill, I don't think that's a bad case because, like I said, Stephon Diggs was literally averaging more points per game than any wide receiver last year other than Cooper Kupp prior to the Josh Allen injury.
Yeah, he was on a tear, and he had some monster games too that are obviously going to contend with what what Tyreek Hill can give you. Because that's why I prefer Tyreek Hill over these guys, is that he has a higher weekly ceiling than most of them. But Stephon Diggs, like you said, was right there. He is the type of guy that can absolutely smash if the Bills smash, which we know that they have the capability to do. It's an easy projection for him again as well, because Stephon Diggs is one of the best receivers real life in the NFL. So we have no concerns from a talent perspective. Josh Allen, one of the best real life quarterbacks in the NFL. We have no concerns from a talent perspective there. They are a high paced offense. They throw the ball a lot. It's very easy to see Stephon Diggs have 180 targets again, because he's the clear number one for his team. Maybe this, Gabriel Davis in a contract year, Dalton Kincaid coming in. That all helps the offense, which helps Diggs internally, because he can have, 15 touchdowns if the offense is really good. And Josh Allen threw for, 45 touchdowns, 50 touchdowns, like you said. So Diggs and Lamb are throw them in a hat. Same with Hill, to be honest. Those guys are all up in the air for me. Cooper Kupp is the one guy that I have differently ranked from you. And I've been well on record saying that, Cooper Kupp is a guy that I'm lower on relative to consensus. Things that he has going for him are, of course, how he has performed the last 2 years on the field. He was dominant in 2021, like the best wide receiver season we've really ever seen from a fantasy football wide receiver. Last year, same level of target dominance. He's the clear alpha in that offense. He gets everything under the sun. Red zone targets, deep targets, short targets. It doesn't matter. Cooper Kupp is the guy. And this year, he has very little target competition to deal with. It's going to be basically him and everybody else yet again. And he has the ability to average like 11, 12, 13 targets a game. Pretty much no other receiver, sans maybe Justin Jefferson, has that ability. So Cooper Kupp has a lot going for him. But what he doesn't have going for him, and why I'm a little bit lower on him, is the fact that the offense is up in the air. How good is this offense going to be? Sean McVay is a good coach, and obviously Matthew Stafford's a good quarterback, but is Matthew Stafford going to stay healthy the entire season? He's older. He's dealt with back injuries. Cooper Kupp himself coming off of a tightrope high ankle surgery, which is not usually a very invasive procedure, but as a 30-year-old wide receiver, it raises red flags for me, at least. So for me, between Hill, Lamb, Diggs, and Kupp is by far the riskiest.
Yeah, he's definitely the riskiest, but the reason why I still have him as a top 5 player, as my 5th overall player, I do actually have Diggs over Kupp. Made that switch this morning. I had Kupp at 4 for the longest time. The reason why I have Cooper Kupp up there is that, as much as we want to say and compare any other wide receiver in fantasy to the potential ceiling that Cooper Kupp showed, it's not really the case, because Cooper Kupp's ceiling in the past 2 years, when he's been healthy and when Matthew Stafford has been healthy, has been just a tier above in terms of production to any single other player in fantasy, for that matter. When Cooper Kupp was healthy last year, I mentioned he tied Stephon Diggs in terms of points per game when Matthew Stafford was healthy, 24.8 PPR points per game on 9 receptions per game, over 100 receiving yards per game, and 0.75 touchdowns per game. Now, of course, Matthew Stafford, we're not exactly sure about what the situation is going to be. I'm leaning on the side that he's going to be fully healthy, but I guess if you want to consider, he's banged up, I want to bake that type of risk into my ranking of Cooper Kupp, that's fine. But for me personally, just the ceiling is so much higher than any other wide receiver in this range, in my opinion, sans Stephon Diggs, that I just got to rank him there. And of course, Tyreek Hill's up there too. But as good as Tyreek Hill was, 22.4 PPR points per game, Cooper Kupp was just a next level, like 3 more points per game than even Tyreek Hill had.
Yeah, I get it. Cooper Kupp is awesome. He has the ability to break fantasy football yet again. But let me just read you the amount of points that the Los Angeles Rams scored when Matthew Stafford was healthy. So not when Matthew Stafford was out. When he was healthy, in week 1, they scored 10 points. In week 2, they scored 31 points. In week 3, they scored 20 points. In week 4, they scored 12 points. In week 5, they scored 9 points. They're not a dominant offense the way that the Bills, the Cowboys, and the Dolphins, and the Bengals, and the Vikings could be this year. So that's the other part that makes me concerned. The nice thing is that Cooper Kupp, when they score points, is probably the one doing it. But at the same time, the offensive concerns, their offensive line was ranked one of the bottom 5 units in the NFL entering the season as well. So there's a lot up in the air. When you have an old quarterback who's injury prone with a bad offensive line, a 30-year-old wide receiver coming off of surgery, it raises red flags for me. And it's the reason I'm a little bit lower on Cooper Kupp. So much to the point that he's not even the guy that I have ranked here. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown, Bud Light Cooper Kupp, ranked over Cooper Kupp. So people are going to be mad. Let me explain first before you go down to the comments and call me an absolute moron for having Amon-Ra St. Brown over Cooper Kupp. The way I look at this situation is this. Amon-Ra St. Brown has 90% of the target earning potential that Cooper Kupp has, which is pretty crazy to say for a guy who was just in his second season last year, a guy that literally was commanding basically a 30% target share as a second-year wide receiver. His offense is much safer. It's a much cleaner projection. Even though Jared Goff is not the greatest quarterback in the world, he proved that he can play at like Kirk Cousins levels and keep this offense on schedule. And Cooper Kupp versus Amon-Ra St. Brown also comes down to the fact that Amon-Ra St. Brown is 23 years old and Cooper Kupp is 30 years old. The fact that, Cooper Kupp could be a descending player, Amon-Ra St. Brown is still an ascending player. The offensive line in Detroit was ranked as the second best unit by PFF entering the season. And also, Amon-Ra St. Brown was elite in both yards per route run against man and zone. He was the only wide receiver outside of Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase to rank in the top 8 versus both coverages.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love Amon-Ra St. Brown as well. He would actually head my next tier in terms of the 1-2 turn values for what it's worth. But gearing back in terms of Amon-Ra St. Brown versus Cooper Kupp, I can't get there. The simple reason is we are basically hoping Amon-Ra St. Brown can be even 90% of what Cooper Kupp was, because that is how ridiculous 100% of Cooper Kupp was. Like Cooper Kupp last year, for what it's worth, I already mentioned the numbers, 11.6 targets per game, 9 receptions per game. It's like we would need a perfect breakout season for Amon-Ra St. Brown to get to what we've already seen from Cooper Kupp, even when he was battling Matthew Stafford's inconsistencies, the offensive inconsistencies last year. He still averaged 0.75 touchdowns per game. When they were scoring touchdowns last year, it was completely isolated on the back of what Cooper Kupp was giving you from an output standpoint. And even if we have slight positive regression, let's just say even Matthew Stafford doesn't reach 2021 levels. Let's just say it's better than what we saw last year, which is a very reasonable thought, in my opinion, given the offseason, given that he's going to be healthier going into the year, because he was even dealing with back injuries going into last season. If Matthew Stafford's healthy and we see the offense even show any semblance of 2021, Cooper Kupp can average a touchdown per game. He's shown it in the past.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the ceiling range of outcomes. I think Cooper Kupp absolutely has a higher ceiling than Amon-Ra St. Brown. But we're also, when it comes to wide receivers versus running backs, for me, I actually am a little bit more risk averse than I am with running backs, where I'm swinging for ceiling. I know that, running backs inherently get injured at a high rate. When we talk about a 30-year-old wide receiver with a 35-year-old quarterback coming off of back surgery with a horrible offensive line, to me, it raises a lot more concerns than Amon-Ra St. Brown, who really all he has to do is continue his 32.3% target rate at 23 years old as a second-year wide receiver, which is an absurd number. He just gets a little bit better this year, and he's an elite wide receiver in fantasy. He's an absolute difference-making wide receiver, one with a 20-point-per-game ceiling, and that's why I have him a little bit higher, because he's less risky, and he has 85-90% of the ceiling that Cooper Kupp has.
And if you just isolate the games that he was completely healthy in, he didn't leave early, he didn't get nicked up, none of that nonsense, he was averaging about 19.2 PPR points per game, which would have ranked as a wide receiver 5. Like, I genuinely think his projection at that 1-2 turn, which is where I have him, is flawless. Like, if you compare realistically in current ADP right now, you compare CeeDee Lamb and Amon-Ra St. Brown. You can compare, AJ Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devontae Adams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, even Garrett Wilson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, whatever. If you leave that with at your 1-2 turn in a full PPR league, you are going to be so far ahead of the 8 ball to the rest of your league mates that it's not even funny. And I do personally think that's why in a bog standard full PPR 3 wide receiver start league, I might even favor picking at the back 1-2 than I would picking at the top, simply because as much as I love Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase's projections, I do think that these guys are closer than the public maybe sees them. And the range at the end of the second round versus the top of the second round is so vast this year that any of these guys going at the back end of the first, early second round can easily be mid to high end wide receiver 1s. Whereas at the back of the second round, there's maybe only one guy we'll get into in a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm on the same page. So you have Amon-Ra down in this tier, like you said. So we'll go with that going forward, just as our consensus, because it is, more so me that's pushing Amon-Ra up. The other guys that I have ranked in this tier, and we'll kind of speed this up so we're not going too long: Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown, Devontae Adams. These guys all have their own individual cases. I would say for each one, I'm just going to outline how they bust and how they smash. Garrett Wilson, it's pretty simple. If Aaron Rodgers is Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson's going to smash. He's going to be 170 targets, monster second-year breakout, 30% target share, 25 even if he was a 25% target share in an Aaron Rodgers-led offense that throws 600 times, we're talking 150 Aaron Rodgers targets, which is going to lead him to a top 5 season. The way he misses is if Aaron Rodgers is washed, pretty much, or the offense with Nathaniel Hackett is so archaic and terrible that, they put up a disappointing season. But honestly, I don't think that's really going to be the case. A lot of advanced metrics shows that Aaron Rodgers did not fall off that much last year. Maybe he's not quite the 2-time MVP that we saw in 2021 and 2020, but he's still a very good quarterback. AJ Brown, I'm a little bit more concerned for because his offense did not throw the ball a ton. They were 536 pass attempts. He has a very, very capable ascending player still in Devontae Smith, who's entering his 3rd year to compete for targets with. And Dallas Goedert missed a number of games last year. Plus, we know in the red zone, Jalen Hurts is going to run the ball. They have, Rashad Penny and DeAndre Swift to help them out in the red zone now as well. AJ Brown's a little bit less of a ceiling than I would say the majority of these other guys are. I think he's a locked and loaded wide receiver 1, but I don't think he has the target earning potential to get to that 160, 170 targets like St. Brown can get to, like Garrett Wilson can get to, Kupp, Diggs, Lamb, Tyreek, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and Devontae Adams can all get to that level. AJ Brown cannot get to that level with the presence of Devontae Smith, with the presence of Dallas Goedert, with the fact that Jalen Hurts as a mobile quarterback probably won't put up like a 600 plus pass attempt type of season. And then Devontae Adams, the most disrespected of this group, the most, bar none. If I had to rank the best real life receivers in the NFL, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and then the next tier being Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs, probably, and Cooper Kupp. Like, those guys are that good. And Devontae Adams has the ability to have 180 targets this year, even if you're scared about Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo sounds like he's healthy. I'm not really concerned about the health. Even if you're scared that he's not going to push the ball as far downfield like, Derek Carr did. For example, Derek Carr had like 70 deep targets last year. Jimmy Garoppolo was like 35. I would say that Jimmy Garoppolo was more so a product of the 49ers offense, checking it down, getting it to the yak monsters. I think in McDaniel's scheme, he's actually going to push the ball downfield a little bit more than we're expecting. And even if he doesn't, Devontae Adams is going to command probably 180 targets this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned quickly that in real life, he would be tier 2. Like, in real life, Justin Jefferson's probably my 1. I would have Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs right off the bat before Jamar Chase. So in terms of real talent, I would actually think it's even higher than a guy like Jamar Chase, despite, of course, obviously the situation, Burrow, the youth. Obviously, Jamar Chase is perfectly fine at that top 2 value. But I think that Devontae Adams, given the reception perception data, given his ability to score touchdowns, he scored like 14 of the 25 passing touchdowns that the Raiders threw last year, which is fucking insane. Nothing that we've seen from Devontae Adams is telling us that Devontae Adams is falling off. So I'll quickly, make my piece with Devontae Adams. 22.8 PPR points per game, wide receiver 2 pace with a 31.24% target share when Darren Waller was out of the lineup. So we can definitely see him have that level of dominance, of course, over the entire Raiders pass weapons group yet again. Him going in the 2nd round is one of the best gifts of the entire fantasy cycle. And your comment section might get me on this. They see the jerseys in the background. They may be like, well, how can you do that? I have Devontae Adams ranked higher than AJ Brown simply based off the fact, like you mentioned, as garbage as the Raiders offense may be, I can still project Devontae Adams for 170 plus targets. With AJ Brown, as good as the Eagles offense is, I just think with the passing volume, with the target competition at hand there, his ceiling is more so, 150 to 160 targets. I don't quite see that level of volume ceiling that I do with a guy like Devontae Adams. And you mentioned Garrett Wilson. I'll quickly get into that as well. This is a guy that averaged almost 25% of the targets on the season last year as a rookie wide receiver. Combine that with the fact that in non-Zach Wilson started games last year, he averaged about 17.3 PPR points per game, which would have ranked as the wide receiver 8. I think all we can project right now is that Garrett Wilson's coming off like a back-end wide receiver 1 season, because basically that's what he was doing when Zach Wilson was not the starting quarterback. And now he just upgraded to a Hall of Fame, arguably top 5 level talent of all time at the quarterback position. So people might say, well, he's a first-year wide receiver going into a second year. How can you project him at the 1-2 turn? He already played like a veteran wide receiver last year, so why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah, and speaking quickly on Devontae Adams' ability one last time, the end of Matt Harmon's reception perception, which, by the way, Devontae Adams showed no signs of slowing down. 94th percentile against man, 96th percentile against zone, 88th percentile against press, or actually mix that up. Press, 96th, 88th against zone. The last
Ridiculous.
sentence really sticks with me. Devontae Adams has another set of quarterback questions this coming season. However, he's not just proven to be an elite NFL separator. He might be the best wideout to ever hit an NFL field at getting open. Like, we're talking about an all-time great potential Hall of Famer here, and we're fading him because Jimmy Garoppolo is like 10% worse than Derek Carr. Like, no chance, dude. I agree. I have Devontae Adams over AJ Brown as well. I actually figured you wouldn't. That's why I rank them this way in this order. But I have Devontae Adams over AJ Brown as well, because the target ceiling for AJ Brown was 146. That's the highest number of targets he's achieved in an NFL season. Devontae Adams has been well over 170 multiple times, and I think he can absolutely do it again, even if it's Jimmy Garoppolo as his quarterback. If you want to downgrade and you want to, feel safe at night because you drafted a Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver versus a Las Vegas Raiders wide receiver, I won't argue with you. But when it comes to straight opportunity costs, I would rather take mid-second round Devontae Adams versus late first round AJ Brown any day of the week.
Heartbeat. I think current ADP actually has on Underdog AJ Brown is the 8th overall player selected, like Devontae Adams like 15 or 16. And again, like we just said, I like the projection for Devontae Adams better straight up. Maybe in best ball you want to tie yourself to the better offense, like you kind of said. I get that, but if that's going to be what the ADP is in season-long managed leagues, Devontae Adams is going to be the best value of the second round, because realistically, you can pair him with any of those guys that we have in that first round picks here. Sam, maybe, Tyreek Hill. Like, I think Stephon Diggs can fall in some home leagues. I think Cooper Kupp can fall in some home leagues. And obviously CeeDee Lamb, like his current ADP on best ball is like 11th overall. So there's a real possibility that you can pair 3 of those wide receivers with Devontae Adams. And trust me, if I got that start to my draft, say I picked, 9th overall in my home league, and that's how I started my first 2 rounds, I would be sleeping at night like a baby.
Yeah, I will say if Jacobs holds out into the season, I probably will move AJ Brown ahead of Devontae Adams because I expect the offense to suffer as a result of that. But again, we're talking about a guy that has literally had double-digit touchdowns, including 18 in 2020 and 14 last year. In 5 of the last 6 years, he scored over double-digit touchdowns, Devontae Adams. He is automatic in the red zone, and you don't think he's already been double covered in the red zone his entire career. It doesn't matter. He gets open and he scores touchdowns. So he is a guy that you like. I've heard a lot of fantasy analysts say he's the biggest bust in the second round. Unsubscribe. I'm telling you right now, they don't know what the hell they're talking about. Devontae Adams is going to be just fine this year. Don't worry about it. Let's get to the 2-3 turn values, and this is where it's going to get a little bit more interesting because some of these guys are not the number ones on their own teams. And people are going to fade them for that reason. So ADP has it around this range. T. Higgins, Devontae Smith, and Jalen Waddle are in this range. We also have another guy in this territory, and you have another guy in this territory as well. So let's talk about these 3 first, and then we'll break down the other guys that we have in this range. So obviously, Waddle, Higgins, Smith. None of these guys are the number one on their team. Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, and AJ Brown are all better receivers and are going to command more targets. But the thing that makes me excited about these players is knowing that in home leagues specifically, people will fade them because they're not the number ones on their teams. And people will be like, I would rather take receiver X or running back X or quarterback X over these guys because, Waddle's ceiling is capped by Tyreek Hill. Higgins' ceiling is capped by Jamar Chase, and, Smith's ceiling is capped by AJ Brown. That is absolutely factual. Their ceilings are capped by the fact that they have a number one receiver ahead of them on the depth chart, but we're not talking about running backs here. These guys are wide receivers. They're not likely to get injured because running backs get injured more than wide receivers. So if you're going to go for a guy who's just a clean back end wide receiver 1 projection, like all of these guys are, early wide receiver 2 at the lowest end, I'm totally fine taking these guys. I want pieces of this Miami Dolphins offense. I want pieces of the Cincinnati Bengals offense, this Philadelphia Eagles offense. I'm totally fine with these guys in the early 3rd round.
Early 3rd round is going to be my key point there, because I do think if you're taking them in the mid to late 2nd round, I just would prefer the running backs in that range, and I just would prefer the quarterbacks personally in that range, given how dominant they are at their position. So in terms of the running backs, I'd prefer like guys like Tony Pollard, Nick Chubb, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor for me. And then obviously the 3 quarterbacks would be Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, and Jalen Hurts. But that still leaves Jalen Waddle as the next best player on my rankings as the 22nd overall player. So like you said, if you can start Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and then one of these guys falls to you, I'm comfortable there. But like I kind of said earlier in the video, I personally would rather the production bundle of a CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp mixed in with one of those 1-2 turn values wide receivers, as opposed to these 2-3 turn value wide receivers for me personally.
Yeah, I do think the drop-off in terms of overall ceiling is pretty large once you get out of Adams and AJ Brown to Jalen Waddle, T. Higgins, and Devontae Smith. And then, one of the other guys that we have listed in this tier as well. because, like you said, those guys have the ability to finish as like 20-point per game type of wide receivers. These guys at the end of the first round or at the end of the second round, early third round, they probably need an injury to Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, or Tyreek Hill for them to feel that kind of ceiling. And for that reason, I understand why people are a little bit lower on them. And I too would take Tony Pollard, Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Nick Chubb, even Breece Hall, if we get some better reports coming about his health in the next couple of weeks. And then same goes for Allen, Hurts, and Mahomes. I would take all of those players above Jalen Waddle, who is my highest ranked of these guys.
Yep. Jalen Waddle's my highest ranked at 22. I'll quickly give my spiel on T. Higgins and Devontae Smith, because obviously they would be like the next wide receivers already on the screen. But we, of course, like you said, alluded to a couple guys that we will be adding to this list. But with T. Higgins, this is a guy that averaged nearly 18 PPR points per game when he was healthy last year. In fact, when he was fully healthy, didn't deal with injuries, averaged 17.88 PPR points per game, which would have ranked as the wide receiver 7 in fantasy. So for those people that are saying, well, he's the number 2 in this offense, I don't really care. It's a Joe Burrow-led offense. It's a Cincinnati offense that will throw the ball 650 times. And like you said, he's got some intrinsic value there. He's got some potential implied value there where if Jamar Chase misses any time, he can be the 25, 26+% target share wide receiver from Joe Burrow. Like I said, I mean, he was averaging, like I said, 17.88 PPR points per game on only a 22.57% target share. So although he may never be, an alpha 26, 27, 28% target earner, barring a Jamar Chase injury, he's still going to be a quality back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 that you can rely upon in your lineup every single week. And not to mention, if you have some big play bonuses, Joe Burrow's going to create a lot of those in this offense.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's add the other 2 guys to this tier. I have one of them. I think you have this guy in this tier as well, but I have him ranked first of this tier, which is why I will. He's your second. So you have Waddle ahead of him, I'm assuming?
I have Waddle, yeah.
Right. And I think I just said that I had Waddle first, but that was among these number 2s.
Yep.
Calvin Ridley is the other guy that we have ranked in this tier. And the reason is because Calvin Ridley has higher ceilings than all 3 of these guys, because Calvin Ridley has proven back in 2020, in 2021, before his injury, that he can command 28, 29% of his team's targets. He has the ability to be an elite alpha wide receiver 1 this year, for the main reason that his peripherals are absolutely unbelievable, and he is himself an elite talent. He is going to an offense that I think will be the breakout offense of 2023. I think that Trevor Lawrence has a chance to be the MVP of the NFL. I think they could be that good as an offense. And Calvin Ridley is the number 1 receiver of this team. Yeah, he's got a little bit of target competition. Christian Kirk's a good receiver. Evan Ingram's a solid tight end. Zay Jones is a capable number 3. But Calvin Ridley is the straw that stirs the drink in this offense. There's a reason that they went out and got him. He has seasons where he had double-digit touchdowns. He has seasons where he had over 150 targets. He's been a top 5 fantasy receiver in the past, and now he moves to an offense that runs a top 5 pace of play, a top 10 pass attempt unit. They have a young, ascending, elite quarterback in Trevor Lawrence. Their offensive line should be improved with the addition of Anton Harrison in the draft as well. I think that this offense could legitimately be a top 5 unit in the NFL, just like the Eagles were last year as the breakout offense of 2022. And Calvin Ridley will be the catalyst for that, which is why I personally would take him over Jalen Waddle, over T. Higgins, over Devontae Smith. But the nice thing is I never have to do that, because he goes 7 or 8 picks at least behind them in ADP. Sometimes you can get this guy at the end of the 3rd round, and I have him ranked at 23 overall in the end of the 2nd round.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This is a guy that I actually have ranked in terms of Calvin Ridley as the top of the 3rd round. But like you said, you will not have to take him here in any of your home league drafts, because guess what? In the majority of leagues, Calvin Ridley is going to be at highest a 3-4 turn pick. Possibly in a numerous amount of leagues, he will fall into the 4th round, especially in a more casual setting. In Underdog, I think, like I said, he's like a 3-4 turn pick on Underdog. We already know that in home leagues, the running backs are going to be pushed up. People are going to be less risk averse. Oh, he didn't play last year. I don't want to take this guy who hasn't played. Oh, Christian Kirk beta, sadly. People are going to say any nonsense that comes to their head. But guess what? What I do know is that when Calvin Ridley was last fully healthy, sharing a field for 9 games with Julio Jones. So if anybody wants to say, well, Christian Kirk can be the wide receiver 1, Calvin Ridley outproduced Julio fucking Jones, who is a first ballot Hall of Famer the minute he decides to officially hang up the gloves. Calvin Ridley was targeted 143 times in the 15 games he played that year. Buy the hype. Calvin Ridley's still that same stud wide receiver. People will point to, well, he wasn't good in 2021, the 5 games he played. Yeah, but he's dealing with injuries, and apparently there was a lot of sourness in his mental health, and obviously he had that that parlay business that got him to miss the entire 2022 season. That's a thing of the past. He's in a new situation now. He's with an MVP potential quarterback in terms of talent, which what Trevor Lawrence represents. And he has the opportunity, like you said, to command upwards of 150, 160, 170 targets. And because we expect Trevor Lawrence to gear towards, 30, 35, maybe passing touchdowns next year, would it all shock us if a guy who scored 10, 7, and 9 from Matt Ryan has an outlier 12, 13 touchdown year? Not at all for me.
No, not at all, dude. I hear some sharp people. Like, there's people I trust that are like, oh, I'm not really in on Calvin Ridley, but nobody explains themselves. Nobody said, like,
Nobody.
People are like, oh, I'm not really drafting a lot of Calvin Ridley. Why not?
Well,
what's the problem?
They'll say risk. They'll just say risk.
Okay, risky. He's risky, sure, but you're getting him in the mid-third round for a reason. That's why the risk is baked in. If he didn't have any risk, if he played last year and had a top 5 season, he'd be a first-round pick right now.
Yeah, like in 2020, he was like legitimately the wide receiver 3 in points per game. The guy was the wide receiver 5 on the season in 15 games played. He had almost 1,400 yards in 15 games played. Are we not thinking he has that level of same talent? Like, do people think he just magically got worse at football?
No, absolutely not. And again, if we combine the fact that the Jags will throw more than the Falcons already did, and that Trevor Lawrence is a better quarterback at the point in his career that Matt Ryan was at when Calvin Ridley had his great season, and that Christian Kirk is not as good as Julio Jones, even in 2020 towards the back end of Julio Jones's career, Calvin Ridley's a stud, man. Draft him everywhere. He is literally going to be my highest rostered wide receiver in underdog drafts. By the end of the summer, he's already my 3rd highest rostered wide receiver, but I'm going to get my exposure up once we go back to Buffalo. So yeah, Calvin Ridley, a guy that I'm absolutely high on right now. I can't get any higher on him than I already am. The last guy of this tier, I'll let you make the case for Chris Olave because I do not have him in this tier because, I'll get to that. You make the case for him.
It all stems back to the fact that he commanded 119 targets in the 15 games he played, nearly 1,100 yards in his rookie season. Even if we're as low as we can be on Derek Carr, and I know you're going to argue otherwise, he's an upgrade over Andy Dalton, whether that's team commitment, whether that's play calling tendencies, signing a huge deal this offseason. Regardless, when Dennis Allen's in the game and Derek Carr's giving some input, Derek Carr's going to be given much more of a benefit of the doubt than Andy Dalton was filling in as the backup quarterback last year. That's just intrinsically what's going to happen from a coaching perspective. Even if this is a lower volume situation, we're getting a near 27, 28% target projection next year, in my opinion, going into the second year with Chris Olave. It's just inherently what's going to happen. We've seen it from CeeDee Lamb. We've seen it from T. Higgins. We've seen it from every first-year wide receiver who showed flashes in year one, ends up being a better overall player in their second year. And then we combine that with the fact that you project this for a 500, 510 pass attempt offense. I think they're going to be closer to 550. And if that's the case, he's commanding about a 28% target share. We should roughly see about 145 targets. I will agree with the fact that he's being drafted too high right now. He's about a mid to back end second on underdog, more so a mid third in my rankings. But if you can combine a second year player getting about 145 to 150 targets, I'm fine with that in the 3rd round. But like you're going to get into, 2nd round is where the line gets drawn for me.
Yeah, I think he's egregiously overpriced. And the reason is because you said Andy Dalton and Derek Carr, no big deal, right? Pressured completion percentage, advantage Andy Dalton. Yards per attempt, advantage Andy Dalton. Accuracy rating, advantage Andy Dalton. True passer rating, advantage Andy Dalton. Quarterback rating, advantage Andy Dalton. Expected points added, EPA, advantage Andy Dalton. He was way better than Derek Carr last year with worse weapons. He had a rookie wide receiver and no Michael Thomas, and Derek Carr had Devontae Adams, who we both just said is like a top 2 receiver in the NFL. So for me, Derek Carr is a downgrade or at least a net neutral for the situation. The offense is run by Dennis Allen. This is not the New Orleans Saints of Sean Payton's days. Their offensive line was ranked bottom 5 in the NFL entering the season by PFF. We have Derek Carr, who just had a down season behind a bad offensive line, throwing to Chris Olave, who's a great receiver, don't get me wrong, but they're not going to throw the ball a ton. They have 3 capable running backs to carry the ball. They're going to run the ball. They run this completely archaic, old school offense with Dennis Allen. I think he might be the worst coach in the entire NFL, and he's probably going to get fired first of any coach in the NFL, in my opinion. Chris Olave is the new Terry McLaurin as far as I'm concerned. He's a great receiver. He's a very talented receiver. He's going to have very good peripherals, probably a 27% target share. But on a 510, 520 pass attempt team, it's going to equal 1,100 yards and 5 touchdowns, which is basically what he did last year, which made him a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2. He's being drafted as if he has a top 5 ceiling, which he absolutely does not in this current offense.
Well, you just basically rang off his stat line that he produced as a rookie in 15 games played. I think if he plays 17 games and he goes into his second year, like you're still looking at a guy who projects for 1,250, 1,300 yards next year. And if that's the case, not to mention you're mentioning the negative aspect of Derek Carr with how bad his last previous season was. But I mean, we have a sample size of him being a much better quarterback. Of course, if he does not improve from his last year's numbers, the floor is lower than I project. And like you said, his ceiling is capped towards maybe a back end wide receiver 1, which is why I have him ranked that way. I have him ranked as a mid third round pick. If he slips in my drafts, I'm comfortable taking him there as a borderline top 15 level wide receiver. But I will say for those valuing him as like the wide receiver 11 right now, I just need to know why.
Yeah, I will say, like, why is Derek Carr going to get better, though? Derek Carr, yeah, he's been better over the course of his career, but he is now older and in a worse system. So why is he, and he has a worse offensive line as well. So why is he going to get better than what he approved last year when he had an elite wide receiver in Devontae Adams to throw to and the NFL rushing champ behind him as the running back?
Well, for what it's worth, I do think that in terms of overall projectable team success, that the Saints this year are going to be figuring to be better than what the Raiders were last year. As low as I am on the Saints, you think that they're going to be like a 6-win
points in the NFL last year? They lost because of their defense, not because of their offense.
But in terms of overall morality, in terms of overall like how they're feeling in the locker room, I do think that does affect overall in terms of his play. He knew he was going to get replaced.
I guess.
I mean, he knew he was going to get replaced.
I'm not high on this offense. I don't think they're going to be very good, and for that reason, I'm not high on Chris Olave. I think his range of outcomes is very tight. He's a good enough player that he can be, wide receiver 14 in points per game, which by the way is lower than where he's being drafted right now. And his floor is probably like a high end wide receiver 3, low end wide receiver 2, similar to what he was last year. But at the same time, he doesn't have a top 10 ceiling, a top 5 ceiling. I would rather take Waddle, Higgins, and Devontae Smith, who, even though they're not the number ones for their teams, their offensive success, the amount that they pass the ball, the amount of plays that their team run, the pace of play that their offenses go up tempo, they're better projections simply because they have the touchdown scoring ability that Chris Olave does not, and the ability inherently that if their starter goes down ahead of them, Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, and A.J. Brown, they can have an elite ceiling as well from that perspective. That is the end of the top 15. Real quick, actually, you know what? Screw it. We're not gonna go through the top 20. We'll just rattle them off right here, really fast. Next rated receivers for me are these guys: DK Metcalf, Amari Cooper, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and Jerry Jeudy. They all have their individual host of issues. Amari Cooper, he's just kind of an overall inconsistent player. DK Metcalf has a lot of target competition. Same goes for Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. Jerry Jeudy, he's a young player. He hasn't really done it yet. And Russell Wilson was coming off of a bad season. So that's how I have those guys ranked. Do you have anybody different than I have?
I actually do. So I have a slight difference here. So Jeudy would be my 16 overall. So he would go to the far left for me personally. I would have Cooper as my 17, DK as my 18. I'd have Mike Williams as my 19, and I'd have Deebo Samuel as my 20. So the only difference there is I have Mike Williams inside my top 20, Brandon Ayuk out of it.
Yeah, I think the reason I can't get there with Mike Williams, just at least quite this high, I really do like him this year, is because he does profile as more of like a wide receiver 3 in terms of usage. Because he only has maxed out at like a 21% target share over the course of his career. And yeah, he plays with Justin Herbert, who's a great quarterback, and they're probably going to throw 700 times a game. I think you have to, even though I'm not high on Keenan Allen, you have to respect the fact that he is the number one of that team, at least anytime he's on the field, and he's going to command the most targets. So for me, that just downgrades Mike Williams a little bit. I still really like him, but I can't quite get there on the level of these other guys.
The way I kind of see Mike Williams is that think of everything we think of T. Higgins in terms of pure volume. Because obviously, Jamar Chase is a much better overall football player than Keenan Allen. But in terms of volume, I feel like you can assign Jamar Chase 28% of the targets. Let's just say you assign Keenan Allen a similar part. I think Mike Williams and T. Higgins do play that role of that big-bodied outside wide receiver that can be that, tertiary weapon. The difference that I have, though, however, is I think Mike Williams can contend for 10, 13 touchdowns, whereas Keenan Allen, I think he's probably capped at like a 6-7 touchdown type of player for me.
Okay, so by that logic, wouldn't Keenan Allen need to be ahead of Mike Williams in your rankings?
In terms of pure volume,
like Jamar Chase projection in terms of
of pure volume, correct. However, once you bake in the fact that he's an older wide receiver, You're baking in injury risk. You're baking in, maybe he's just a Jarvis Landry type of projection this year where the volume's going to be there, but the efficiency won't and the touchdown scoring won't. I feel like with Mike Williams, you're getting the big plays. You're getting the touchdown opportunity. And I mean, we're both high on Justin Herbert to potentially throw 40 touchdowns. I think Mike Williams is going to be the catalyst of that.
Yeah, I will say after I did the wide receiver league winners video, it has opened my eyes a little bit to Keenan Allen. I still don't want to draft him because he's a 10th year wide receiver, which typically is the fall off for wide receivers, according to Ryan Heath. And he's coming off of a game in which he missed in which he missed like 10 games,
7 games
for a routine hamstring injury because he kept re-aggravating it anytime he tried to come back. That is a huge risk for sure. But if you told me right now, Keenan Allen plays 15 games next year, how high does he finish in fantasy?
If he plays 15 games, I would absolutely raise him into probably my fringe top 15. I think that would be the proper projection. The problem I have with it is that I don't think he's the same player talent-wise that he was a couple years ago. And like you said, he's entering his age 32 season. He's already dealt with injuries in the past. I'm just baking in the risk a lot more, similar to what you're doing with Cooper Kupp. The difference for me is that Cooper Kupp's ceiling is worth that risk. Whereas with Keenan Allen's, maybe he poses a wide receiver 11 season. I don't think that risk is worth the upside.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with you for what it's worth. I was just playing devil's advocate. I'm not drafting Keenan Allen. I don't think he's worth his price tag right now, which is about a mid-third rounder, similar to what you have to spend on Amari Cooper, DK Metcalf, and Deebo Samuel. I think I have him ranked a little bit after that point, but I did flip-flop Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in my rankings because I can't reasonably say that Mike Williams is going to outscore him because even though he has the big play upside, potentially the touchdown upside, Keenan Allen is simply just a better projection and has more target upside himself. So even though I'm worried about the fact that he might get injured and I'm worried about the fact that he might lose a step and he probably only has like a back end wide receiver 1, high end wide receiver 2 ceiling, I can't say that Mike Williams has a higher ceiling than that. He just doesn't.
I will say, though, for what it's worth, the last time that they were fully healthy on the same field together back in 2021, because obviously each had their injury issues this past year, Keenan Allen outscored in full PPR formats Mike Williams by like 7 points. Like, I do think that Keenan Allen getting 2 years older, Mike Williams, developing into potentially the number one, obviously 2 years ago. Now he's got 2 more years under his belt, hasn't hit that age clip that Keenan Allen has, is enough to make up the difference for me.
Yeah, I can't quite get there, but I understand the arguments. And I guess, standard scoring or half PPR with big plays, you take Mike Williams, maybe in full PPR, no, scoring bonuses, you take Keenan Allen. Those guys are definitely neck and neck. This was, give or take, our like top 22, top 23 for wide receivers. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully you got some value from this. We kind of worked through this like on the spot, going through the individual arguments for each player. This is kind of what we came to as far as a consensus. Like I said, I'm a little bit higher on certain players. Danny's a little bit higher on certain players. Like, for example, I have Amon-Ra St. Brown in that first round picks tier. Danny has, Chris Olave in the 2-3 turn values. I have him a little bit further down. So it's a fun debate. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. If you want access to all of our rankings, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, positional tiers, last year's finish in points per game type of data, the contextualized game logs that Danny's made reference to throughout this video, as well as a redraft cheat sheet that you guys could print off and bring to your draft, or that you guys could check off right there in the Google Sheet online while you're doing your draft. Head on over to Underdog Fantasy and use the promo code FSE for a $10 deposit. You'll get access to our entire redraft rankings manifesto for the draft season. And as well, you'll get our weekly rankings come in season time when it's time to make start sit decisions as well. That is a really special offer. The complete fantasy draft kit that we have for you to offer is all it costs you is a $10 deposit on Underdog Fantasy using promo code FSE. Or if you already have an Underdog account, or if you already or you can't play in your state on Underdog, you can get it on flockfantasy.com/FSE. And the link is down below for that as well. 30% off using our promo code, a free Zoom consultation if you sign up annually. All that is linked down below. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.